Both Mercedes and Aston Martin has dropped two of the most beautiful looking two-door front engine sports cars off this year, and I would say off maybe the last 5 years. So in this video, I want to show you which one I would personally buy based on mostly the design, but we're also of course going to talk about some of the spec and tech here from this article from Carbuzz. So there's a lot to cover in this video, so let's jump straight in to this article. I'm going to link it down in the description. So who wore the 4-liter bi-turbo V8 better? Aston Martin Vantage versus Mercedes AMG GT, and that is the question. So the British brand has gone slightly overboard with the power figures, despite a marketing campaign that claimed figures do not matter. Of course they matter. So we have a 4-liter in-house engine to produce 656 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque. Of course, it is AMG sourced, though. They just modified it to their liking at Aston. And this is the second most potent non-electrified version of this engine on sale today. The number one goes to the Aston Martin DBX 707, which I've done a review on, which is insanely fast. For it doesn't feel like an SUV that big should be able to move that quickly. You can go and check that review out on the Sketch Monkey channel. Then you have the AMG GT Black Series, used to sit at the top of the food chain with 720 horsepower, but that is now no longer in production. However, AMG will probably make a new Black Series of this new car at some point, and here you can see both of these stunning designs. Two different philosophies when it comes to styling, but at the same time, I'm going to show you just how similar these are, specifically in the front end. You can clearly see it here, what's going on with the features and the positioning of everything. So design, as they say here, is subjective, and we'll leave it to you to decide, and I will decide which one I would buy in just a minute. But you can see here how close these two are inside. So we have the length, the Mercedes being a little longer than the Aston Martin, but look at the wheelbase being almost identical, and then we have the width. And this is where I think Aston Martin has the upper hand, because we have a lot wider body on the Aston Martin, and you know what that means. It's going to look super planted on the ground. Mercedes still does look very nice and planted as well, but I just don't think, specifically from a 3/4 rear view, which we're going to have a look at in a minute. And then you have the height. So the Aston Martin is wider and lower than the Mercedes AMG GT. And here you have the old Aston Martin Vantage V12 looking fantastic with these extra fins. Here you have, I wasn't never sure about this wing in the rear. I would much rather remove that, because I think it ruins some of this beautiful rear end with this ducktail on the V12, but I guess it serves a purpose to add some downforce to this specific car. So the new GT is relatively new, and more powerful models are expected to follow, but for now the most you can get out of it is 577 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque, which is exactly the same torque number as the Aston Martin Vantage. And here you can see the spec and tech side by side. The biggest changes here, or the biggest differences, are the drivetrain, which in the Aston Martin is completely rear-wheel drive, while in the Mercedes GT you have all-wheel drive. However, you can switch it off, the power to the front, and have it be completely rear-wheel drive if you want to. 0 to 60, the Aston Martin has more power, but it is a little slower than the Mercedes. And I said this in my when they unveiled the Vantage, that I do think this is a very conservative number. It probably does 0 to 60 a lot faster than that, more closer to 3 seconds. It does, however, have a higher top speed than the Mercedes. And as I said, AMG defaulted to all-wheel drive, and it can also be locked in rear-wheel drive if you want to. And the Vantage is decidedly old school, but also not. The power is sent to the rear wheels. However, you can turn everything, all the electronics interference, you can turn all of that off and just try and see what would happen if you do that with a 650 horsepower rear-wheel drive car. But I'm glad that they allow you to do that, not like Mercedes that always has a little bit of interference engaged in the computer. Another plus for the Mercedes is that they opted for a 2+2 setup, so you do have very small rear seats or passenger seats in the back seat. You can't really fit an adult in there. The Aston, however, does not have any rear seats at all. However, they did dump the old Mercedes sourced infotainment system and now have an in-house infotainment system. You can see just how big of an improvement this is from the previous interior of the Vantage. I talked about that in my previous video here on the channel. Just looking fantastic in my opinion. Now the pricing, we don't have pricing for either the Vantage or the AMG GT, but the Vantage is expected to be around $190,000. The Mercedes GT is supposed to start at about $175,000, and as they say here, that's a narrow enough margin to not really matter in this price range. And I also made a comparison here on this channel between the AMG GT and the 911 GT3, which cost basically the same as the Mercedes. And I'll let you know which one I would buy of those two as well in that video. So with that said, let's jump into Photoshop here and let's have a look at these stunning, stunning designs from both of these companies. I think this is the pinnacle of both Mercedes design and Aston Martin design because they look so fantastic and they are in this dream scenario in the packaging, which is a two-door front engine sports car. That's every designer's dream to one day design this specific package. So up top, obviously, we do have the Mercedes. Up here, we have the new gorgeous Vantage down here. And have a look at the front end styling, just how close these two actually are. We have the headlight here of the Mercedes sticking out and reaching out pretty far up the front bumper. We have a grille that goes from narrow at the top right here to wider at the bottom. And we also have this cut intake in the side going down here into the lower section of the car. And look at the Aston Martin. It looks almost, the positioning of these features are almost exactly the same spot as we have on the Mercedes. We even have these two muscle lines here on the hood being intact, although a little bit sharper and narrower on the Aston Martin. And I do love the difference here in the front end that I love on the Aston Martin is look at the fenders and the muscle that goes over the front axle. There's a huge difference here between the more bubbly solution that Mercedes has with more rounded surfaces on the outline, while Aston Martin comes back with more of an exotic feel. We have this hood, and then you have an additional bulge which is separated from the hood, being the outside fenders, which then houses the headlights in the front end, giving it a more, I would say, a more exotic feel for me. This grille, I've heard a lot about this grille in the previous days. Some think this is too big, but in my opinion, I don't really think so. I think Aston Martin has done something good or something great with this design, because the grille is factually big, but it doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, look out of place or too big for the overall graphics and proportions in the front end. I'm not sure how Aston Martin managed to work that out, but that is how I see the front end of these cars. Now, looking at the side view here, and this is probably the hardest for me to figure out which one looks the better, because again, Mercedes comes in with a more round feel, more closer to a Porsche 911. Specifically, if you look at this shoulder line, you can't really see a sharp shoulder line that goes from one end all the way back to the rear end. We do have that in the Aston Martin with this line right here that then dips and slopes down all the way and then comes back and shoots right back up here in this stunning ducktail in the rear end. The greenhouse, again, more of a bubbly feel for the Mercedes. Specifically the greenhouse, where you have this roofline first of all, and then you have the greenhouse being very soft and rounded, even rounded here in the back, in the very corner, while in the Aston Martin it feels more raked in the A-pillar and then dipping down very tightly and sitting lower than the Mercedes as well. And we also have the greenhouse being sharper, having clearer edge in the back part right here. The other graphics of the body, the treatment of the surfacing, we do have one sharp line here on the Mercedes down here looking nice because it stretches all the way across into the rear axle. However, it does not have a connection to the rear bumper. While in the Aston Martin we do have a new side air vent right there compared to the previous or pre-facelift Aston Martin. I do think this looks so much better with this sharp line that cuts in, like goes into this hole that we have in the side. And then we have some more styling features down here at the bottom, more stylistic, a little bit more curvatures in the lines, but the surfaces of the Aston Martin definitely also feels a lot sharper than the Mercedes, even though both of these look absolutely fantastic in side view. The wheels of both of these cars, I'm not a huge fan of these black wheels, but the design looks fantastic. Same goes for the AMG GT. Now jumping into the rear view here, and two completely, again, different philosophies when it comes to the styling of these two cars. Mercedes having brand new graphics for the taillights, looking more organic in this case and more rounded. And I'm not so sure what I think about these 3 pieces of LED that we have sitting here. I'm gonna have to wait until I see this in real life. They do look like they have some texture to it, so they sit a bit in a 3D form. These pieces sticking out from the black background piece. You have the reverse lights integrated right here in the black piece as well. We have the diffuser looking pretty similar to what we have in the Aston Martin, with these curvatures pushing upwards in the corners, and also have this side intake on the very end of the bumpers on each side of the bumper. However, there is not really a proper ducktail in the rear end, which is totally fine. You can see just how smooth this surface is right here. It's all curvatures, and then we have one sharp line to end to create a subtle but clear and decisive ending for this design when you look at it from a side view. Quad tailpipes, of course, this being an AMG. Now, looking at the Aston Martin and just the similarities here, we still have the quad tailpipes in the new Vantage. We also have the diffuser. I actually prefer the diffuser of the Mercedes here because I'm not sure I like how this sticks out too much from the body with this black piece of the diffuser. However, this area in between these lines, this is just a genius design solution for me, because I think this is one of the best looking treatment and also the most unique treatment of rear end graphics. How these beautiful taillights, the LED here, climbs upwards and creates a border almost for this ducktail that we have sitting up here. And we also have this very nice chamfer going into a second chamfer sharpness right there with the logo up top and the letters at the bottom, looking fantastic. But the overall positioning, again, like we have in the front end, the positioning of the diffuser and how this is stylized with this curvature. It also goes up here, as you can see, in the corners. We also have the outlets here on the side like we have on the Mercedes, and the quad tailpipes. There's a lot of similarities between these two cars, but the main thing here that I love about the Aston when it comes to line flow is the shoulder line, because in this view you can clearly see how this beautifully dips down into this corner here before it shoots up into the deck or the tailgate, the ducktail in the rear end. Now, the biggest change between these two cars is going to have to be these two interiors. Just have a look at the Mercedes. It looks almost like the inside of a nightclub or something like that, with all these lights and neons and sparkly stuff going on, while you have the Aston Martin being way more restrained and dialed down and cool in its interior. And in this case, I'm definitely going to have to go for the Aston Martin, because I don't like this integration of this screen. Just look at the differences here between the integration of the infotainment screen in the Mercedes and then in the Aston Martin. A lot smaller screen, and I do think today, in today's world in car design, smaller screen is in most cases a positive for the interiors of the cars. The steering wheel, as you can see, they look very similar here as well. I do think the base of the steering wheel is actually the same between these two cars. I might be wrong there, but we do have, of course, different styles of the spokes. I do love actually both these steering wheels. I do think they both look fantastic. Paddles here on the Aston Martin are way bigger and surfboard-like compared to the ones we have in the AMG GT, which just sticks up a little bit here on the top, and you can barely see them at the bottom. Again, I much rather have them be big like this, where you can clearly see them, and a little bit thinner as well. But the good news with both of these interiors is that we have gauge clusters now that have a housing for it, even though they're both completely digital, which is totally fine. We do have a nice housing for it, a very unique housing in the AMG GT, looking fantastic, and we also have more of a traditional housing for it in the new Vantage. So which one of these would I buy? It all comes down to the styling for me, and specifically the interiors, and that means that I'm gonna have to go with the Aston Martin Vantage in this case. I think it's I'm having a hard time thinking of a better looking car in this segment than the brand new Aston Martin Vantage. I do think it's that good, and I cannot wait to see it in real life.